The Falcons' fatal flaw gets exposed in the 35-17 Week 7 loss of the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, here on Locked On Falcons. We're going to talk about why the offense and defense both struggles, but why all is not lost and what are the right lessons to learn from this game.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So guys, you know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, aka Sirius Black, aka Mr. Drew, aka the very humble host of this Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And guys, today's episode of Locked On Falcons is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projections, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. So, guys, we thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. It's free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including on YouTube. If you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube, hit that bell, give us a like. You will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So let's jump into this rapid reaction here a couple hours after the Falcons' Week 7 loss to the Cincinnati Bengals by a score of 35-17. And basically what we saw on display today was the exact formula that you wanted to draw up to beat this Falcons team. And we talked about this leading into this game. We've been talking about this going back since like week 2 of this season, as this is the sort of formula. And that formula is, for the opposing team, you want to get up early and you want to make the Falcons play left-handed. You want to force them to have to abandon the run game, which, by the way, did a decent job in the first half of this game, especially finished the game with 107 yards rushing. But you want to force this team to throw the football. And again, I apologize to all my left-handed folks out there when I use the term play left-handed in a pejorative sense, but you guys get it. You're all sinister folks out there. But I think, whether you want to blame play calling, weapons, the offensive line, or the quarterback, I think there's a lot of blame to go around. There's culpability, I think, on all parties here for this performance on Sunday. If you want to look at the play calling, we've talked about this before. Arthur Smith's 2-man route concepts aren't necessarily enhancing your ability to produce a dynamic passing attack. It did work out on that 75-yard touchdown to Damiere Byrd right before the half. But I don't know if you can count on Eli Apple's poor technique to bail you out more than once or twice in a football game. And then you look at the weapons, right? It was a quiet day for both Drake London and Kyle Pitts. They had combined for 4 catches for 18 yards, and you're basically expecting more out of your top 10 draft picks. But then again, you can also say, like, this offense isn't really designed, going back to the play calling issue, for them to do a lot more than that. You're only dropping back and throwing the ball 16 times in this game, and them getting 6 targets out of those 16 dropbacks isn't necessarily a bad number. 6 out of the 13 throws that Mariota had in this game. And then you look at the offensive line. Right, 3 sacks allowed on only 16 dropbacks is not very good. That's a very bad number, right? 6 out of 16 targets is not a bad number, but 3 out of sacks on 16 dropbacks is a very bad number. And all 3 of those came in the second half, presumably when the Bengals could pin their ears back and get after the quarterback, forcing the Falcons to throw the ball. They even got a sack on a 3-man rush in this game, and we talked about this earlier this week on the Q&A episode on Wednesday, talking about the offensive line isn't as good as people think it is, looking at some of the raw numbers from a pass protection standpoint. And that's part of the reason why Arthur Smith calls all these 2-man route concepts, so that he can have extra guys in to block and chip and slow down opposing pass rushes. Because he doesn't have the confidence that they can hold up if they get into a straight drop back passing game with 5- and 6-man protections. And certainly I don't think today's game and their performance in today's game is certainly going to make him less likely to call those types of plays moving forward with those 2-man route concepts. And then you get to the quarterback, right? And I'm sure this will be the bulk of where the conversation is this week. We saw Marcus Mariota have a great week last week, and you wondered, or at least I did, you wondered if that was going to be an outlier and he would come back down to earth this week against the Bengals, or he would follow that up with another good game and prove that at least this early season struggles in the first month of the season were more related to rust than anything else. And we'll sort of see what the film says when I check it out on Tuesday and break it down on Wednesday's episode. But, my conclusion watching the game live, I don't think Mariota was terrible in this game. At least compared to some of the early season performances we saw in the first month, felt like it fit in just in line with those performances. So I don't know if today's performance was especially bad or anything like that. But then again, I know a lot of folks thought those performances in the first few weeks of the season were especially bad. And so it brings up kind of the chicken or the egg conversation, right? Is the Falcons offense limited because they have a limited quarterback, or is the quarterback limited because the Falcons offense is structured for a limited quarterback, right? And so my opinion is kind of it's both, although I probably think it's more reflection of the quarterback than it is the exact structure of the offense. And, we're going to be right back to all the people calling for Desmond Ridder to start, just like we were 2 weeks ago, right? And, we're at a point, going into week 8 where I predicted Desmond Ridder to be the starter back in the summer. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case going into this Carolina game. But unless Mariota, doesn't have a bounce back performance against Carolina, who's coming off a very impressive win against Tampa Bay, that defense held Tampa Bay to 3 points this past Sunday. If maybe that Ridder prediction was off by a week, right? And instead he'll be starting week 9 or something like that. And so, I'll be like, well, the prophecy was clouded because of daylight savings. That's what threw me off. I said week 8, but I meant week 9. But I think you go back to those earlier games where the Falcons were on the road, like they were on Sunday against the Bengals, against the Rams, against the Bucs. They fell into 3-score deficits, just like they did against the Bengals, falling into a 21-0 hole in the first quarter, or a few minutes into the second quarter. And in those Rams games and that Bucs game, the Falcons made plays to get back into those games, and they simply didn't make the plays to get back into this Bengals game. Right. And so it's not necessarily a shock to me that the Bengals were the one team that they couldn't do it against, since apparently they're like the best second half football team in the league. And from a defensive standpoint, they have a top 5 pass defense in this league. So, even if you thought the Falcons were capable of being able to throw to get back into the game, the Bengals aren't really the defense to do it against. And then, I don't know if you can rely on your running game to just basically, Tyler Algier and Caleb Huntley to just pick up 100+ yards in the second halves of football games to get you back into every single game. And Cincinnati was successfully able to shut down the Falcons run game in the second half. I think the Falcons were successful on just one of their 7 first down runs in the second half after going 4 for 8 in the first half. On those early downs, on those first downs, when you're getting successful runs, 50% success rate in the first half, you're putting your offense on schedule, and the Falcons are putting their quarterback in a better situation to be able to throw in second and manageable and third and shorts and whatnot. You're not getting that when you're playing on second and long and getting third and longs in the second half. And so kudos to Cincinnati. They had a game plan. They executed that game plan brilliantly, so that they deserve a lot of the credit for that. And a big part of their success was how good their offense was. We'll talk about why the Falcons defense struggled in this game against this Cincinnati offense, which was built very well to basically pick apart this Falcons offense or Falcons defense. But we'll also talk about, a bright spot for this Falcons defense with some solid play in the second half of this football game. We'll get to that as we continue today's episode, but I do want to plug the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast feed, which Locked On Falcons is a part of. Locked On Sports Atlanta, you can find 3 different shows covering local sports as well as national sports. That's A to Z with Mark Zeno, Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, and ATL Day Ones with Jarvis Davis and Tanitra Batiste. All 3 of those shows on the same podcast feed. And if you check out Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube, you will also be able to check out the Locked On Falcons postcast, where Jarvis and myself are breaking down every Falcons win, loss, and possible tie this season live immediately after the game. So make sure you subscribe to Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube. Hit that bell so you know when we go live, as well as subscribe to Locked On Sports Atlanta on your other preferred podcast apps. And guys, I want to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by Prediction Strike, the world's first sports stock market. You can now invest in professional athletes just like stocks. It's lower risk alternative to sports betting, and athlete prices move up and down based off of performance and supply and demand. If you invested into Jalen Hurts a year ago, his stock would be up 48%. If you invested in Kyle Pitts, it would be down 44% this year. But it's not just NFL. You can also invest in UFC, NBA, MLB. So diversify your portfolio, invest in something that you actually know about as a football fan. All you got to do is download the Prediction Strike app and use code LOCKED for a free share when you sign up and make a first deposit of $20 or more. That's promo code LOCKED, LOCKED, for a special one-time giveaway. Prediction Strike will choose one person who signs up with the code LOCKED and makes a deposit to win 100 free random shares that could be worth up to $3,000 if you get lucky and receive those Josh Allen shares. Invest in what you know on Prediction Strike, the stock market for sports. And whether you're looking to pop the question or have a milestone or want to celebrate and let your love sparkle, Blue Nile can help. As the original online jeweler, Blue Nile offers the largest selection of diamonds and pieces priced significantly below traditional retailers. Blue Nile has helped millions of couples create their perfect engagement ring. Their easy online tools are going to let you choose the diamond shape, size, clarity, and setting style. And maybe you're looking for a fine jewelry piece, but are still having trouble choosing. Blue Nile has the jewelry experts available via phone, via chat, 24/7 to help you find a memorable gift to fit your budget. Shop stress-free with Blue Nile's 100% satisfaction guarantee. All orders are insured. It's shipped for free in discreet packaging, and overnight shipping is also available if you're in a rush. All you have to do to make your moment sparkle is go to BlueNile.com and use code LOCKEDON to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. That's BLUENILE.com, code LOCKEDON to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. BlueNile.com, code LOCKEDON. So, guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports today. From the games that matter to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide by subscribing to Locked On Sports today, available on this app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. So let's talk about the Falcons defense against the Bengals. And so, as expected, you want to prohibit the big play. So the Falcons came out in this game early and played cover two. And I'll watch the film to see if they kind of switch things up as the game progressed. But live, it did seem like they did kind of move more towards cover three, particularly after A.J. Terrell went down in the second series. But with that cover two, you're going to have those split safeties. That's going to funnel the ball towards the tight end and the slot receivers. And we saw Hayden Hurst have a big game. We saw Tyler Boyd gash this team, including on a 60-yard touchdown to start the game. And, things didn't help the Falcons. They were already beat up in the secondary. You had Casey Hayward on IR. You had D. Alford out with a hamstring injury. So they brought up Cornell Armstrong off the practice squad to help out the depth. Darren Hall was already filling in for Hayward at the starting position. And then A.J. Terrell went down, I think, on like the 8th or 9th play of the game with a hamstring injury. He injured that last week against San Francisco, and they quickly ruled him out for the remainder of the game. So that will be something that we'll have to monitor moving forward. That forced Armstrong to basically be their other outside corner, and the Bengals, exploited that weakness. They got that big play to Tyler Boyd, split the two safeties. Richie Grant fell down on that play, but it wouldn't have mattered because he was basically going to be out of phase for that 60-yard touchdown. Chase, Higgins, Boyd, they proved to be significant challenges for our backup corners. They would have been significant challenges even if we had been 100% healthy with Hayward and Terrell in the game. That's how good that trio of receivers are. So, of course, they were going to be challenges for our backups. And then the injuries were further exacerbated with Mike Ford getting injured on a punt return in the second half, Jalen Hawkins going out of the game with a head injury in the fourth quarter. And again, of course, the Bengals had already taken advantage and continue to take advantage in this game. They had 10, 20-plus yard plays, 9 through the air. The 10th was a 20-yard run from Joe Burrow late in the game. Those 9 explosive plays through the air accounted for 267 of Joe Burrow's 481 yards passing. 3 out of those 9 big plays went for touchdowns in this game. Burrow wound up completing 81% of his 42 passes in this game. And you knew the Falcons game plan. They were going to go into this game, try to play zone, protect against the deep play, which they did not do. And, the injuries only exacerbated those issues, which forced them to even rely more on the zone coverage. And, as you guys well know, especially if you've been watching this show for any amount of time, that when you play zone coverage, you have to be able to get pressure with 4 guys. And the Falcons needed the guys up front to dominate this game. They did not dominate this game. They did finish with 3 sacks in this game. D'Angelo Malone, Grady Jarrett, and Lorenzo Carter each got a sack in this game. But given, how many times the Bengals dropped back to throw the football, you kind of needed that number to be like, instead of 3 sacks, you needed like 6 sacks. They finished this game with like 6 quarterback hits. Instead of that number, you kind of needed like 12 quarterback hits if the Falcons were going to be able to dominate this game up front in the way that they needed to slow down this Bengals passing attack. They did not get that. And we talked about this earlier in the season, particularly after that Rams game, where we talked about how Matt Stafford was able to cook this defense. And we talked about the high caliber quarterbacks that we're going to face this year: Stafford, Brady, Burrow, Justin Herbert. The caliber of those caliber of quarterbacks, given the Falcons bend but don't break style of defense, they're just going to kind of torch this defense. And unless the Falcons can dominate and pressure the quarterback, they're just not going to really have anything to do with those offenses. They're not going to really be able to do anything to slow them down. Now, to their credit, they did seem to slow down the Bengals in the second half, evidenced by they only gave up 7 points in the second half. Burrow did complete 76% of his passes, and it didn't seem like they were gashing them as thoroughly with those big explosive plays. I think 3 20-plus yard plays allowed in the second half. And I think most of them, if not all of them, at least 2 of them came on one drive in like the third quarter. I think it was on that one scoring drive, but it seemed like the Bengals might have gone to a lot more dinking and dunking. And I'll be curious to revisit the film later this week to see if it was something the Falcons did defensively that led to that, and the Bengals checking the ball down a little bit more. Again, that cover 3 leads typically to a lot more sort of dinking and dunking than the cover 2 does. Or were the Bengals just, that was part of their strategy to sort of supplement a middling running attack by going short passes, like a 4-yard pass, is just as good as a 4-yard run, as a way to sort of keep, possession of the ball and run out the clock through the air rather than just handing the ball off to Joe Mixon. They didn't really commit to running the football until the final drive with a little bit under 9 minutes in the fourth quarter. Prior to that, I think they had like 12 passes to 5 runs leading up to that drive. And then on that drive, they did run the football, and then they had a number of 3rd down conversions through the air that basically was able to bleed away those final 9 minutes of the game. So, if there was a moment for this defense to kind of get back into the game, it was, in the third quarter, where they had that Richie Grant interception that was nullified by an offsides penalty on Abdullah Anderson. It was basically a free play when Anderson jumped, and then Burrow overthrew his receiver. I think probably one of like 4 bad throws that Burrow had in this game. And then the penalty wiped it out. And basically 3 plays later, including 2 of those big plays that they had in the second half, the Bengals were at the 1-yard line, and they got basically their final score of the game. So that felt like the last straw of the game, the last real opportunity for the Falcons to get back into the game, especially after, the Bengals getting that touchdown. They couldn't really move the ball that effectively, other than a couple of yards. I think they got 1 first down on the subsequent drive. So that was basically a wrap at that point at the end of the third quarter, really, for this Falcons team. So we'll wrap up today's episode talking about what we learned about this team. And despite sort of this humbling at the hands of the Bengals, we'll talk about why I don't think people should be too disheartened by this loss as we continue today's episode. But before we get there, I do want to tell you about Prize Picks, a fun new way to play daily fantasy. You just pick 2 to 5 players, and they score more or less in the Prize Picks projection. You can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. And the great thing about Prize Picks is you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections. And it's not just for the NFL. You got NBA, you got NHL, PGA, college football, so much more. Prize Picks is safe, it's fast, it's easy. It's currently in operation in over 30 states in the US and Canada. All you got to do is download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up to play a fun new way of daily fantasy. First-time users can get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That means if you deposit $100, you get $100 in free money to play with. Don't forget that promo code Locked On, LOCKEDON, at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And guys, before we wrap up today's episode, I want to let you know that Locked On Falcons, along with the other Atlanta podcast, is now available on Roku and Amazon Fire TV as part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta app. Download the Locked On Sports Atlanta app today to get that great local coverage 24/7 on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. So let's talk about what we learned in today's loss. And frankly, I don't think we learned anything, right? This to me is what the Falcons are, right? We already knew this, right? Certainly, Locked On Falcons listeners have no excuse. They already should know this if they've been listening to this podcast regularly on the basis. We already knew that this offense was very one dimensional, right? We've already mentioned, as I said earlier this season, week 2, we said, hey, this defense is probably going to struggle against good quarterbacks, right? We even saw this last week against Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Jimmy Garoppolo played well last week. It was really the receivers for the 49ers that let him down by dropping a whole bunch of big plays, right? And like Jimmy G is kind of like the Mendoza line, so to speak, for like competent quarterback play in this league is, somewhere in that 12 to 15 range that most people will have him in terms of their quarterback rankings. And so basically, if you're better than Jimmy Garoppolo, you're probably going to cook this defense. And if you're not, then this defense has a good chance, right? And fortunately for us, we only look at the rest of the schedule and we say, okay, who's above that Jimmy G line, right? Herbert, Jackson, and Brady, right? Now, maybe on any given Sunday, Jameis Winston or Kyler Murray could be on the list. Well, we know Jameis Winston, just specifically on the Sundays where he's playing the Falcons, is going to be above that line. Hopefully we'll get some turnovers or whatever the case may be. But, basically outside of those 3 to 5 games, every other game for the Falcons is going to be very winnable because this defense should be able to keep most of the other quarterbacks that they face this season in check, right? And so, it's going to be difficult for this team, outside, in those 3 to 5 games, though, because if they can't get more from their passing game, there's going to be this big lopsided difference between what you're getting from Tom Brady, what you're getting from Lamar Jackson and Herbert and Burrow and all those guys, than what you're getting out of the current quarterback situation, which is going to lead to why you're going to continue, much to the chagrin for those Mariota stands out there, that you're going to continue to hear people calling for Desmond Ridder, given that we kind of have a pretty sizable body of work that kind of tells us Mariota is not really that guy that's going to close the gap on those guys. Right. Maybe Desmond Ridder's also not that guy, but, again, the possibility that he seems again, until he gets on the field and proves it one way or the other, is going to feel a lot higher for a lot of folks than we believe it to be with Marcus Mariota. So, I know another topic that's going to come up is people are going to look at this game and say, man, we got to make a move at the trade deadline. We got to go get a pass rusher. We got to go get a cornerback to fill in, especially if AJ Terrell's out for an extended period of time. And I've heard a lot of people ask me that question. Aaron, do you think the Falcons are going to make a move? You think they should make a move at the trade deadline? And I'm going to say, I don't think they will make a move. Whether they should, it depends on what type of move we're talking about. Like if you're looking for a pass rusher, sure. Like if you want to give up a late round pick for Robert Quinn, you want to unlock, Ryan Pace from the closet and untie him, and say, okay, Ryan Pace, do what you do. Let's go trade a 6th round pick for Robert Quinn or something that enhances pass rush. Okay. I'm not going to complain about that. But, I know a lot of people are like, hey, let's go out there and make a play for Bradley Chubb. I don't get that. Why are we going to give up premium picks? Denver's not going to give Bradley Chubb away, guys. So why are we going to give up premium picks for injury prone pass rusher? Now, if we're talking about March, I'll go hard on Bradley Chubb in March, right? Because I'm going to give him the Jadeveon Clowney treatment because this guy's always hurt, right? He misses on average 6 games a year, right? And I'll give him that 1 year, $10 to $15 million contract that Jadeveon Clowney's now signed for 3-4 off seasons in a row because you can't trust Jadeveon Clowney to stay healthy. Just like I don't think you can trust Bradley Chubb to stay healthy, right? He's a better player than Jadeveon Clowney, certainly a better pass rusher, but I'm not giving up premium assets for a pass rusher that can't stay healthy at this point, especially when you're in a rebuild, guys, right? We got to figure out this quarterback situation, right? I know I haven't forgotten that the Falcons are rebuilding. I think some of you guys forgot, after you got a little bit too impressed with the 3-3 start. Again, we're ahead of the curve from a rebuild start. We're not rebuilding from scratch or anything like that. But until we figure out the quarterback situation, I'm not giving up premium assets for anything, right? Until we know that we have a quarterback, which, by the way, is the most important position on the football field and is the thing that's going to allow you to be a competitive football team. I'm not giving up premium assets for nothing. Now, if you want to talk about, giving up trading for a quarterback, okay, now we can actually have a real conversation. But nobody good is going to get traded at the trade deadline as far as that goes. So, I think the bright side of this loss is maybe it brought a couple people back down to reality, right? Me and Arthur Smith are, we're like-minded on this situation, right? Like he talks all the time about, you're going to get humbled real quick in this league if you get too, far ahead of yourself. And, my philosophy is very similar, where it's like, after a win, it's never as good as you think it is. After a loss, it's never as bad as you think it is. So I'm not disheartened by this loss in the slightest. What will dishearten me is if we're in December and January and we're still seeing the Falcons lose this way, that if we get to the end of the season, we're not seeing that growth and not seeing that development that we want to see from a young football team that is being developed, that is being rebuilt, and they're still losing in this way because they can't, throw the ball more than 16 times in a game and think that they can produce an effective offense. That will dishearten me, but not right now at this point in time in the season. As I said, you can't be too high, can't be too low after these losses. But I see Falcon fans, the very vocal minority of folks who are out here pushing for Arthur Smith to get fired after the 0-2 start. And then after last week's win, some of y'all were ready to start penciling in this Falcon team as a 12-5 finish in the 1 or 2 seed in the NFC. I'm like, okay, again, you got to find a even point with that. And then, the Mariota thing is the same thing. Like, some of y'all act like he's terrible. He's not terrible. He's not terrible. He's not good. Right. And then last week he has the big game and everybody's, oh, he's the new franchise quarterback after one good game. It's like, okay, y'all need to pump the brakes. Again, you got to find that even point, right? That's part of the reason why, again, if I can say so myself, I feel like I'm pretty good at this job because I can stay even keeled on this stuff. So, deal with whatever you got to deal with. Again, I think the Falcons are still a good football team. They didn't have it on this Sunday. We've seen this time and time again on the road against the Rams, against the Bucs, and the Bengals were able to make them pay for it. Unlike those two teams, they were able to get back into those games. They didn't get back in this game, and we'll see if other teams can copy this formula and how the Falcons handle it, or they can get back to what they've done in previous weeks that led to their 3 wins against lesser quarterbacks, where it's a much more even footing in terms of who the quarterback is. And that's where the Falcons run game and their ability to win in the trenches can make a difference and allow them to win those games. So we'll see how they handle that and respond next week against the Panthers, which should be one of those games. I hope PJ Walker doesn't gash us. At this point in time. So we'll see how that goes. But that will do it for us here, guys, on today's rapid reaction. I don't think anybody should be panicking. If you're having trouble, you're being Troy Barnes and you're being like, my emotions, relax. So we'll see how the Falcons respond. They got humbled this week. They'll get humbled again at some point later this season. It happens. This is the National Football League. We'll just sort of see how they respond from it. And that will tell us just as much about this football team as this loss did. So that will do it for us here, guys, on today's Rapid Reaction. Make sure you check out Locked On Sports today as your second listen. You get the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Locked On Sports today is available on Odyssey, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And guys, that will do it. We'll be back tomorrow, I believe, with Dave Choate of the Falcoholic to recap this game. We might even do a live show, depending on the timing of that. So that maybe allow you guys to provide your feedback, towards the end of the show, and we can directly answer some of your questions live during the show. So I'll keep you updated on that. Check me out on Locked On Falcons and Falc fans. And if you want to provide your feedback on this loss, yell at me or whatever, or vent. I don't mind venting. You can direct it at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Leave a comment here on Locked On Falcons YouTube. Jump in the Discord, the link in the description below at Locked On Falcons, as well as hit me up on social media at Locked On Falcons on Facebook and Twitter. So that's it, guys. Really appreciate it. Till then.